Hi, I'm Kay Johnston. I'm co-host with Elizabeth Nelson of Off the Shelf, Book Talk with Book Lovers. So what are you reading, Betsy?
Well, I have quite a few books going at once because I discovered that 3 of them on my phone have to go back in like 4 days.
Okay, so you got to read
I'm
fast.
fast reading all of them. I am reading In the Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. I had on a Facebook post that I put up, I have this thing where if I read one book by an author and I like it, I then feel the need to read everything they've ever written back to back. Now, the good thing is one, I know it's going to be a good author. The second problem, though, is then I run out of stuff to read by that author until they write something else. So this one that I just started, it is about a woman who hasn't seen a friend of hers from high school for like 10 years, and she randomly gets invited to this woman's bachelorette party. And so she goes, and they're out in the middle of the moor, nothing else around, and trying to figure out why she's been invited by this woman she hasn't talked to. And then, of course, as Ruth Ware tends to do with some of her books, there's a secret in the past that comes to the front.
The present.
Yes, so I'm still reading it. I'm probably about a third to maybe a half of the way through it. So I don't know what's happening. Quite know what's happening yet, but it's keeping my attention and keeping me up to read it, so that's always good. What are you working on?
Oh, what am I reading? That's a very good question. I just finished reading the Tommy Mooney series. It's by a gal named Kate Ruan.
Okay.
And anyway, it's a World War II series. And Tommy Mooney is a 12-year-old.
Oh.
And the first book is called Telegram for Mrs. Mooney. And Tommy is creative, to say the least. He takes his lunch, heads out to school, goes to sit in a tree, reads a book for the day, eats his lunch, shows up at home when he's supposed to. No one is the wiser. That's why he's missed 70 days of school.
I would have wanted that for my childhood.
Well, he comes home from playing hooky one day, and his mother's in her room with the door closed, and she doesn't want to be bothered, and he doesn't know what's going on, and he finds this telegram that his brother Jack, a pilot, is missing.
Oh, okay.
Well, this 12-year-old is not going to allow his brother Jack to go missing. So he lives in New York. He spends 3 months training, and he steals the money in the offering plate at the Catholic Church, packs his pockets, and heads to Europe. And he's a stowaway on a millionaire's yacht, gets caught, and ends up befriending the people who own the boat. And he ends up staying with them. Of course, he gives them the slip.
Oh, gosh.
And he hooks up with Jack's fiancée, Daphne, who's 18, isn't much better than he is. And off they go to German-held France to find his brother in Belgium. And all sorts of things happen to them. And I'll tell you, Tommy is quite the character. But there's 3 books in the series: Telegram for Mrs. Mooney, Message for Hitler, and Letter via Paris.
Okay.
And they're pretty quick reads, but they're really funny. And Tommy has a way of getting out of some very tight situations. He does panic a little bit, but he pulls it off. So I just finished the third one. Letter via Paris came out just last week. And so those are the ones that were really, really good. I was surprised at how good they were, actually.
Yeah. There's kind of quite a few books out about that time now with, World War II sort of books coming out. There's the Maggie Hope series by Susan, is it Elia McNeil?
I think so.
So the first one being Mr. Churchill's Secretary. And with that series, Maggie is an American. Is she a dual citizenship?
Yes.
She's an American living in England, and she goes back to sell her grandma's house and winds up staying in London before World War II starts. And she gets a job working for Winston Churchill as his secretary. And she's a mathematician. She was going to go for her PhD, but she went back to England.
Right.
And so it's everything that happens to her, and she becomes a spy, and she's got everything happens to this woman. How many books are in the
series now?
I think
6,
I think the 7th one just came out this summer. I haven't read the newest one yet, but there are, I know there's Mr. Churchill's Secretary, Princess Elizabeth's Spy, and a bunch of other ones. If I name all the names off, Matt has to find pictures of all of them.
Yes.
As I was starting to name them off, I was like, he's probably going to hate me if I keep doing this.
Well, they're really great books, and in a previous episode, we were talking about books and movies, and although Maggie Hope hasn't been directly turned into a movie, if you saw The Darkest Hour, the Lily James character is very much Maggie Hope.
Yes. And I was so that kind of made me think like, well, when she's not here helping him write this speech, obviously she's running around doing what all of this character was doing.
Yes, saving the world.
Yes, but I mean, they were really good too. They're books that pulled me in. And I think I just found them by chance on the library. It was an ebook I downloaded because I needed something to read. Not that I should ever. I should never download books.
You have to read them in order, though.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, that is the thing. And you know, if you're a fan of Maggie Hope, you'd also like Jacqueline Winspear's book with Maisie Dobbs.
Yes.
Now, you haven't read any of those yet.
No, but I've heard you guys talk about them.
They're Maggie Hope deals with World War II. Maisie Dobbs deals with World War I.
Okay.
And again, those books should be read in order because the first one tells you kind of where Maisie started and goes, but they are wonderful books. Really great. There's a couple that are a little weird, but beyond that, they're all, for the most part, really good.
I know. I'm kind of finding now, as people are recommending books to me, I'm discovering that the books they're recommending are actually the first in like a series of like 15 books.
Their series are really popular these days.
Yes, they are. Like one that was, I listened to a podcast called What Should I Read Next? I think I've talked about it on a previous episode. And one book series that everybody kept talking about was Louise Penny's Inspector Gamache series.
Oh, okay, yep. I think you've talked about that.
Yes, yep. I've read the first 3, and they all take place in Canada, in this little town called Three Pines. And so it's the people that live in the town are the same core group with somebody else that lives in the town getting killed. And then Inspector Gamache and his sidekick and his group always wind up coming back to Three Pines to investigate everything. And so it's a great group of, it's sort of similar to the cast of characters you get from Lillian Jackson Braun's
the cat books.
Where, you know, you've got
Quillerton.
The couple that own, like in the Inspector Gamache books, you have the couple that own the bed and breakfast. You have 2 artists that live in a building. You have a lady that owns a bookstore. You have the really crotchety, crabby old lady that lives up in the town. And so it's just this, and then the inspector comes in. So it's just that same small cast of characters, and then somebody else who lives in the town who you didn't know in the book before, obviously, is the one that gets killed.
Of course. You can't kill off
a main character. You can't kill a main character. Then, unless you're George R.R. Martin, you can kill whoever you want. Yeah. But, yeah. They're pretty good. It took me a little bit to get into the first couple Louise Penny books just because I wasn't super familiar with the Canadian Police Department and how that worked, and then they refer a lot to like the Quebecois, which I don't, or like if they're English or your French side of everything. So that was a little confusing at first, but once you kind of figured it out in your brain what was happening, they were pretty good. And those ones too, I didn't really figure it was that person at the end of the book, the bad guy. I couldn't figure out in the first 2, which was good.
Well,
I thought.
It's fun when you can't figure it out. Unfortunately, there aren't many books that you can't figure out. You know, that's one of the things with modern mysteries. For the most part, you can see the killer coming. You know, and so it's kind of disappointing when that happens.
That's why like classic mysteries like Agatha Christie's, and then There Were None. I mean, that's I kind of call it a locked room mystery. You know how Sherlock Holmes always had those where there's a dead body in a room, but everything is locked and there's no way to get out. But they've been murdered or get in. How did they do it? And I think that hers is sort of that book, and then There Were None is sort of the major locked room mystery because they're on an island. You know?
Yeah.
And and then There Were None has had quite a few title changes. Yes. Which I'm not going to get into. Right. But that is the current title.
Yeah, hopefully they don't change it. English title and a British title on a lot of Agatha Christie books.
Yeah. And I just, with Agatha Christie, I watched recently the new Murder on the Orient Express.
Oh, I did too.
And
I saw that.
I hadn't read that book in a while, and I'd forgotten how it ended. With the Hercule Poirot, however it is.
Yes.
He's Belgian. I know that much. He got the big mustache.
Yes.
I'd forgotten how it ended, so I was going through it, and I was like, none of this would never happen. And then I'm like, I get to the end, and I'm like, oh, that explains it all now. Now I remember.
The only thing about that movie versus a book is Kenneth Branagh plays the detective, and he's a beefier version than Hercule or ever was, because he was fussy. You know, he had his mustaches, his clothes are perfect. He always wore patent leather shoes, and you know here. Kenneth Branagh is much more brawny and more aggressive.
Well, he tends to do that with his movies.
Yeah,
but I mean,
it wasn't bad. It was just different.
I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it, but it was just interesting. I immediately wanted to go and get the book and reread the book and see how
better.
It was. Well, the books we talked about this in the last episode. The books are always better.
It's not bad. It's not bad. You know, which is kind of a relief. But you know, talking about books and history, I think, is interesting because it made me think of this one.
Yeah.
Eric Larson is a wonderful writer, and he does creative nonfiction.
Yes.
And creative nonfiction is a genre that takes true events and weaves a story around them. And that's what he's done in books like Dead Wake and
In the Garden of the Beasts, Thunderstruck. My favorite Eric Larson is Devil in the White City.
Yes, Chicago.
He's talking about the people that are putting together Chicago's World's Fair, but then he's also talking about, you know, America's first big serial killer, the one that you know about. I got to be that, but H.H. Holmes, and how it's just this complete contrast of this amazing event going on and all this stuff, and then this terrible, you know, tragedy that's happening at the same time. But the way he writes it, you don't really think that you're reading nonfiction. It doesn't read like nonfiction.
No, it reads. This one is about the Lusitania that was sunk, and I think it's a great read because it's all true, but it reads so easy. The hard thing I have with reading, I've discovered, you know, if you go back and read nonfiction, like literary, like, you know, the Lusitania. It's a really good book, and I wanted to finish it, but at the same time, I didn't want to finish it because nothing good happened to the Lusitania. I mean, that's right.
You know, it's like the Titanic. You watch the movie Titanic, the boat always sinks at the end, unless you're watching Ghostbusters 2 when the Titanic finally made it to New York.
That's right.
But, I mean, you knew it was going to sink, and you knew, you know, everybody that died was still going to die, and it wasn't going to be that happy ending that you usually, like, sometimes you need from a book to read it. And so, I mean, it was good to read about because it was things I learned that I hadn't known before, but it was still, and I mean, it's the same with this one here, which is In the Garden of the Beasts, which talks about the last American ambassador as Hitler's coming to power. And so,
nothing good comes from that either.
And he kept staying. And they're like, oh, it's going to get better. Oh, it's going to get better. In the back of your mind,
you're going, people are disappearing.
And in the back of your mind, you're going, it's not going to get better.
I mean, the book opens with someone getting beat up.
I think so, yeah.
You know,
and then, I mean, you know, it talks about him and his family. And, I mean, it's nothing good.
There's nothing good. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
But they're well done, and they're interesting reads. But to a degree, they're depressing. You're right, because they're true.
Yeah.
And
I find it easier to read a nonfiction book if it's sort of written in like the fiction style, like Bill O'Reilly's book about Abraham Lincoln.
Yep, I read that.
That to me read like a fiction book, and it could be because, you know, he's been on TV and he has that real conversational tone. But with that one too, I learned so much.
Yes.
About things around Lincoln's assassination that, like, I never knew that there were multiple assassinations planned at once.
Oh yeah, that you know
they were going to kill all of the main people in the government.
You know
that
who
night.
does a really, really great book is Team of Rivals by Kearns.
I can't remember.
Last name is Kearns, but I can't think of her first name. But she has a whole section about how they locked down the government after Lincoln's killed, and the vice president. All these people are under siege, and I can't think who ran the government. And this is 1865. This isn't like 24/7 news cycle.
Yeah.
I mean, they had to send telegrams to shut things down. And
yeah. And the really interesting thing to me was the part where they said, like they had a secret service.
Doris Kearns.
You got it.
I got it.
But they had a secret service, but the secret service was there to keep the White House safe. They weren't there to protect the president himself.
Like they changed.
Yeah. But I mean, and it's the same with when you watch movies like Lincoln. It's great to kind of see all these things happening with him coming up, with the Emancipation Proclamation. But when he leaves to go to the movie theater at night.
The thing with that movie, I mean, I love that movie, Lincoln, but I would have stopped that movie when he puts on the top hat
and walks down the stairs.
Walks down the aisle. I wouldn't have done the speeches.
That's how a lot of people.
Yeah, because that was such a powerful moment because he was sort of, I want to say, carefree for a moment.
Yeah.
Lighter in his step, and then.
Yeah. Well, I had a friend after that movie came out. He had recently seen, talking about the other Abraham Lincoln book, Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. He had recently seen that book, and so he was trying to throw good-heartedness into it. He's like, well, he's really sad because obviously his son was just killed by a vampire, and it's like, oh gosh. But I mean, there's that whole genre now where you take people and do that with the Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. We've talked about the Pride and Prejudice and zombies, people taking
classic works.
Yeah. I mean, well, and there's a lot of stuff with like what you would call like twisted fairy tales, where you now write a fairy tale from the villain's point of view. You have Wicked and Son of a Witch, and I just finished one called Never Never, and I can't think of the author's name off the top of my head, but it is takes place in Neverland, but it's the story of Captain Hook.
So it's versus him Peter Pan.
Versus Peter Pan. So it's him getting brought to the island, and then what all transpired to make him not get along with Peter Pan, and and it has how it's the other side of the story, which I find those interesting sometimes because, like, personally myself, I don't like The Wizard of Oz, but I like...
No flying monkeys?
No flying monkeys. No. That would be bad. But, like, if it's any sort of a twisted version, like I read a book called Dorothy Must Die.
Oh, gosh.
Which is Dorothy came back to Oz and then took over and turned into a terrible person, and so now they need to get her out of power. So they bring this other woman back from Kansas to take care of her and get rid of her.
I didn't think I would like this at all.
Oh, the first one was really funny. Then the second and third one got a little tedious.
Yeah, some of those. Another series.
Yes. Yep. And then you have the classic Wicked, which was made into a musical. Which with that now there's a whole thing where people are like, it's based on a book which was turned into a musical. Which then now there's another musical that's based on a book, and then they're going to turn that into a movie.
Yeah.
And this whole
round.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting now how people will you see that more and more with books where they take a traditional story and then they bring in another one. There's a book called Longbourn, which takes place at the Bennett's home from Pride and Prejudice, but it's told from the point of view of the servants.
Ah, okay.
So it's them kind of watching everything.
Is it good?
Yeah, it was good. It's interesting to see a different perspective and to kind of put stuff together.
They did that
way.
with Gone with the Wind. Yes, and it's told from a black perspective.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I remember, I can't even think of, I mean, this is old. I read this maybe 10, 15 years ago. It was big for a brief period of time.
Okay.
I'll have to look up the title of that, but I remember thinking, well, that's interesting, a different point of view.
Yeah. I read the book Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, and that's recently been turned into a series on Amazon as well. And that was really interesting. And for those who aren't familiar with that book, it is an alternate 1950s where the Germans and the Japanese won World War II, and they've since divided the United States sort of in half. So you have the Germans have the East Coast, the Japanese have the West Coast, and there's like a neutral zone in the middle.
Okay.
And so it's people's lives in this time period, and then there are these videos that are put out by the man in the high castle that show, like the one video shows the Americans winning the war.
Ah, okay.
And so it shows these other things that could transpire. And so that was kind of follows along the same time. There's also a book called, I think it's Ringin' the Jubilee, which is if the South won the Civil War.
Oh, okay.
And that one I haven't read, but I did get that from my husband for Christmas.
Okay.
And so he's supposed to read that, but I'll probably read it first because I'm a more avid reader than him.
There's one that Newt Gingrich wrote.
Oh, yeah?
That's kind of the same thing, only it's the Battle of Gettysburg.
Okay.
And the South wins the Battle of Gettysburg. And I have not read that.
Okay.
But it was big for a brief kind of splash, and then because it was in the alternate history category.
Well, and there's a lot of books like that out now with not just alternate history, but then you also get into the dystopian universe, where you have books such as the Hunger Games series.
All my zombie books.
All your zombie books. I don't read zombie books.
I love zombie books. I have 60 zombie books on my Kindle. And in fact, when I'm really bored, I pull out my favorite zombie book to read, which I actually was reading up to today because I downloaded a book, so I didn't need to read it. But it's called Apocalypse. Wait, no. Apocalypse Z, the beginning of the end.
Oh, gosh.
And the thing that's so great about this book is it's written by a guy who's a lawyer. And his wife died. And he's young. He's like in his 30s. And his psychologist or psychiatrist says, you need to get your feelings out. You need to do a blog. So he's writing this blog. And you know, the first thing, you know, he's got a cat. And he lives in this house that's got high walls. And right off the bat, he wants to get all sorts of things. But it's a great book if you're into zombie books.
Okay.
So
I won't read it. I'm sorry. I don't.
No,
I can't do zombie books. But if people do have good recommendations for books that fall into that genres we talked about today, whether it's dystopian books, zombie books for Kay, I'm not going to read them. I'm going to tell you that right now and be honest with you.
I love zombie books, Betsy.
Well, I know you can read them. That's fine. But if you do have options for us, you can let us know either on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. We do have an email as well, which is offtheshelfbooktalk@gmail.com, or you can reach out to the people here at HCVN and they'll let us know as well. But yeah, that'll do it for us today, and keep on reading and let us know what you think.
I never saw you. I was so busy with my zombies.
It's okay.
I think it's a really bad ending. I think we ought to.
I just like the look on Kay's face where she's like, "Oh, I'm getting cut off." I really want to talk about this book, but Liz is gonna shut me up.